Psalm 119 is so long, which is why this is only the second time we've dedicated more than one session to a psalm. We did that for Psalm 23 because Psalm 23 is so well known. But Psalm 119 is so long, and in some part, its length, which is even exhausting to read out loud, as I reminded myself on Friday in reading it, is part of the message. The medium is the message. The key focus of Psalm 119 is the quest to learn Torah. Torah meaning instruction of God, not necessarily the book, though the word Torah will be used, but there's all kinds of synonyms used for God's instruction. Edud, precepts, pikudim, decrees, amra, declaration, davar, word, chok, statute, mishpat, law, tzedek, justice, derech eretz. And most every verse, with a few exceptions, has one of these synonyms for God's instruction. This is a love poem of love of learning, and it's a prayer that one should be able to delve both more deeply in God's instruction and stay the course. And I think that precisely because it's so long, intentionally long, that's part of the message, that there is always more to learn and that it's challenging, hard to stay the course. This psalm, all the more in reading it out loud, has the feeling of waves. It's an acrostic, 8 verses for every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, 8 times 22. And in every letter, not that all the messages of each letter are the same. In fact, remarkably, there is no phrase repeated in this psalm. At the same time, there's this wave feeling of, I seek to learn and follow your law. My enemies pursue me and try to deter me. I love your law. And so there is that sense of deeply personal turning to God in the face of challenge. The other thing about this long acrostic, Art Scroll will say that 8 stanzas for each letter. A traditional explanation of why 8 is that we learn in 8 different ways. Our 5 senses, what we are told that is true, our mental perceptions, our own inner awareness, and the belief that comes with a received tradition. 8 is an unusual number in that normally we think of 7 as whole, but I would read into it that 8s are incompleteness. 8 marks new beginnings. Brit Milah, for instance, is on the 8th day. And that marks a new beginning, a sense of yet much more to do. And in this repetition of 8s, that may be a dimension. And I will add as an aside that 3 of the verses in this psalm, verses 162, 165, and 166, are read at a Brit Milah. Psalm 160, verse 166. Sibarti l'shuatcha Adonai, I've waited for your deliverance, Adonai. Umitzvotecha asiti, and your commandments I have done. There are, in a moment, I will put up the psalm and kind of begin to work through it, knowing that I have to really pace myself because there are so many verses and so much to say. But there are many verses pulled out that are part of our prayers. So before the blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah, we chant several of these verses, beginning with verse 66, and then verses 108, 160, 122, and 162 are all chanted as part of our shofar service. So this psalm is rich in its repetitions that are also distinctive. One commentator referred to it, Rabbi Benjamin Siegel, as a symphony of repeating ideas, but each with their own distinctive expression, and collectively a rhythm that brings us forward as a huge prayer with only 2 verses, not addressed to God. A huge symphony that is ultimately a prayer and distinctly a expression that the learning of Torah is the learning and knowing of song. And with that, let me put up the text. Even in this last moment of rereading, I added a word, meaning there's constant need and opportunity in terms of translation to find refinement. And one of my great challenges with Psalm 119, because it is so long, is that my translation was often on over a matter of weeks. With that, take for instance, at the same time, there is ambiguity in Psalms. That's what we know as readers of these poems. There is more than one way to understand. So let's begin at the very beginning. Happy are they with integrity of the way, the walkers in the Torah of Adonai. Happy are they who keep God's testimonies with whole heart. They seek God. Indeed, they do no wrong. In God's ways they walk. So the first question, is this opening self-description? Is he the happy walker? Or is it aspiration? That this is a psalm, as introduced here, that describes what he seeks. He seeks to be a happy walker. He seeks to walk in the Torah of Adonai. He seeks to be one who does no wrong. And frankly, it's more aspirational because, as we know, one of the surprises of this psalm is the closing verse. I have strayed like a lost sheep. So he, in the very last line, and you can use this as a lens to read back over the psalm, acknowledges that he has gone astray. Maybe in the past, maybe that's what prompts his struggling, that this is a psalm of return. And so back to the beginning, we're still left with the question, aspiration or self-description. As I mentioned, Psalm 1 begins with these same words. Ashrei hagever, happy is the person, shahalach shelo halach b'derech reshaim, that did not go with the way of the wicked. And some say, modern commentators, that Psalm 1 and 119 was the book of Psalms. We'll start tomorrow at 9:30. Psalm 120, only 7 or 8 verses, which is the Psalms of Ascent. 15 Psalms that are a package that some say were added on. Aleph then begins that theme. You have commanded your precepts to observe very much. I implore. May my ways be firmly set to observe your statutes. Then I will not be ashamed when I look to your commandments. I will give thanks to you with uprightness of heart, with my learning laws of your justice. Your statutes I will observe. Do not forsake me endlessly. So again, a little tension as we end Aleph, which is, I God will be faithful. Don't abandon me. With that implying an uncertainty. And yet a promise, a sense that God depends on us. And in that light, an important teaching of the Talmud, Rabbi Hanina, Hakol biyadei shamayim, all is in the hands of heaven, chutz miyirat shamayim, except for awe of heaven, which is to say, this teaching of Rabbi Hanina, 2nd century Israel, Brachot 33b and Megillah 25a in the Talmud, is that free will is ours. And that is part of the tension throughout this psalm. I have the choice to follow the way. I have the choice and the need to learn. And then the bets begin, the second letter. And they begin with a quality of wisdom literature, with a question. How will a young person keep her way worthy? By observing, as is your word. Question and answer. But the psalm is not only prayer, by its content, it is wisdom literature. We have wisdom literature, for instance, in Proverbs, and there'll be a number of verses here that have parallels in Proverbs. Again, I have the privilege of taking the time to translate, in this case, because in Hebrew, all pronouns are, there aren't, bottom line, keep her way worthy, to create a little balance with the pronoun use. I mentioned, now I'm going to again just move forward with a survey of the impact of some of the verses. Verse 12, Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you Adonai, lamdeni chukecha, teach me your statutes. The first half of that verse is where we get the phrasing of the blessings we make according to Rabbi Benjamin Siegel. Verse 18, uncover my eyes and I will look at wonders from your Torah. Some translated as unveil my eyes. Gal, it literally means roll my eyes, meaning roll away the eyelid, so that I will look at the wonders of your Torah. The implication being here, help me see, God, because I know that there are wonders. Normally, the word niflaot for wonders is used for God's works in nature. We get that word in terms of the plagues. Here, it's about Torah. And the Zohar, again, these verses of this psalm will be found rippling forward. Here's what the Zohar, that mystical commentary about how to read Torah, says, quoting this verse in the 3rd volume, 152a, that Torah is only an outer garment, that the inner garment are mitzvot, and that the inner mitzvah is the body. So the clothes are the stories of the Torah. The body are how we are to act in divine ways. And the soul, the neshama, are the secrets contained, hidden beneath the mitzvah, beneath the Torah, that we are to contemplate. Helene and my mother had a statement that endures for me, which as I honor my brother-in-law Dov comes to mind, which is, we are all here for a visit. Our lives are temporary. You know, there's the story of the Chafetz Chaim, and somebody comes far, far to meet this great teacher of the 19th, 20th century, the man whose name is from his famous book about guarding his tongue. The man, having made a long journey, reaches the dwelling of the Chafetz Chaim, and he says to him, "This is where you live?" All there he is a simple desk and a bed. It's as if you're only here for a visit. To which the Chafetz Chaim said, exactly, that is the case. And so here in 19, Ger Anochi, the word ger, here translated as a sojourner, is somebody who's not a permanent resident. And that is how here the psalmist describes himself on the earth. I am only a ger, a visitor. I am in transit. Do not hide from me your commandments. Verse 23 demonstrates a reoccurring theme in Psalms. This psalmist, and we don't know who the psalmist is, we'll see evidence that he might be a Levite later, but he's at tension with the people who wield political power. The rabbis later on will be very skeptical about those who have power. Although authorities, sarim, have sat together, yashvu, of me they have spoken. Your servant will meditate on your statutes. So I pointed out, only to come back to this theme, that the people that make the life of this psalmist uncertain are often people with political power, sarim. There is much, at the same time, there is much celebration, and the overall feeling of the psalm is joyful in many ways. Verses 45 to 48. And I will walk with expansiveness, for your precepts I have sought, and I will speak of your testimonies before kings and will not be ashamed. I will delight myself in your commandments, which I have loved. I will lift up my palms to your commandments, which I have loved, and will converse of your statutes. And so there is conveyed here love of learning, love of Torah as divine instruction. And then that line, and I see Cantor Shula, Zmirot hayu li chukecha, songs of praise, hymns, have your statutes become to me, beveit megurai, in my house of lodging. And here, there's in my house of sojourning. I should change that. 54 will get changed to sojourning, because it's that same word of ger. Now, you see this as on its surface is quite beautiful. He's expressing, as we see leading up to this, how much he loves Torah. And we know that when we love something, we want to break out in song. Songs of praise have your statutes become to me. And therefore, I found it unusual to know that in the Talmud, Sota 35a, this verse is seen as a source of betrayal by David. Again, Psalms in the Talmud being attributed to David, saying that David made light of the statutes, citing Psalm 54, for which he was punished. And the punishment was, as the ark was being carried to Jerusalem, and Uzzah reached out and touched it and became electrocuted, that was to punish David, who made light of Torah. All right, I have to pick and choose because there is so much here. Verse 60. I hurried and did not delay to observe your commandments. Ibn Ezra, the great Spanish commentator, will use this as the expression of the rabbis to underscore Zariz la'asot mitzvah. One should be eager. One should hurry to do mitzvah. Verse 70, another characterization of his enemies. And again, they're the waves of study, seeking Torah, and the dangers of those who oppress him. And he says of them in verse 70, an unusual phrase, tafash kechelev libam, thick like fat is their heart, meaning two things with the image. These people are the wealthy, the corpulent, the fat people, whose hearts are covered over with fat, so they no longer feel. You get the same expression or related to it, not the same words, Psalm 17:10. Chel vamo sagru, in their gross fat they are shut. Pimo devaro begeut, with their mouth they spoke proudly. Here in verse 70, again, he's pointing at his foes. And the notion is, despite them, which is this reoccurring phrase, me, ani, as for me, in your Torah, I delight. Verse 72, better for me is the Torah of your mouth and thousands of gold and silver. You'll find that quoted in Pirkei Avot 6:9. Verse 75 is a sense of acceptance. I know, Adonai, for just are your judgments, and that in faithfulness you have afflicted me. The sense that whatever affliction he might have experienced in his own life, by the enemies or in health, are divinely, ultimately ordained. Back to Hakol biyadei Shemayim chutz miyirat Shemayim, all is in God's hands except for the fear of God, the awe of God, and the sense of this rabbinic notion of Yisurin shel ahava, afflictions of love, implying that his growth in his life is also a product of suffering. The very middle of the psalm, and you know that I literally counted all the words of the psalm to find what the middle would be. And in doing so, I can tell you that there's a lot of words in this psalm, 1,064 words. And the middle is verses 88 and 89. So, Edut picha le'olam, testimony of your mouth forever. And I like the fact that picha is really kind of the middle word, or it's between picha and le'olam. Since it's an even number of words, it's between picha and le'olam. And that's the key message, is that you have provided me, God, with the opportunity to learn from you. You have given me instruction. And here's an interesting line, verse 99. Mekom lamdai hiskalti, beyond all my teachers, I have gained reason. Ki edotecha sichali, for your testimonies are my conversation. Now, here's a tension for the rabbis. What do you mean, beyond all my teachers, I have gained reason? You should be dependent on your rabbis for learning. And this is saying, you, God, gave me unmediated wisdom. You gave me instructions that even goes beyond what a human teacher could teach me. But quite remarkably, it gets flipped in Pirkei Avot. Here's the teaching of Ben Zoma 4:1, the beginning of the 4th chapter. Ben Zoma Omer, Ezehu Chacham. Ben Zoma says, who is wise? Halomed Mekol Ha'adam, the one who learns from every person. Shene'amar, as it says, and now we'll quote the first half of Psalm 99, Mekol Melamdai Hiskalti, from all my teachers I have learned. And so this refers to the emphasis. What the rabbis do is they circle the first word, from each I have learned reason, rather than saying, again, taking it as the statement that what it means to be wise is one who can learn from anybody. I learned this teaching from Elie Wiesel, who said that the most admired teachers, scholars in our tradition are called Talmidei Chachamim, students of wisdom. My teacher and dean, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, in his commentary on Lev Shalem, has that insight stated by Samuel Yusida in the 16th century, before Elie Wiesel. That's where Elie Wiesel drew it from, but that's who I heard it from and made an impression on me, which is that to be a student, to learn from each person in our tradition, you're always a student if you are wise. You never own or have wisdom. And now I pause to honor Mimi Goldstein, who's here on our class, with her love of verses 101 and 103. She said that verse 103 appealed to her sweet tooth, and 101 was very comforting. How sweet to my palate is your declaration. And again, that's kind of parallel to your teachings are for me a song. More than honey to my mouth. And now 101, from every evil way I've restrained my feet in order that I might observe your word. From your laws I have not turned aside, for you have instructed me. And what Mimi wrote me in terms of a note in that regard, as Mimi writes as follows. So many of the verses in the psalm are sweet, warm, and fuzzy, so satisfying, comforting. Verse 101 reminds me that I can always be and do better, that there is always more to learn about and from God's word. Verse 105, the image of a lamp to my feet, that also I mentioned there's a lot of parallel to Proverbs 6:23. Kiner mitzvah, for a light is mitzvah, a candle. The Torah or, and Torah is light. Verse 108, another good line for all of us, particularly for a cantor amidst us. It appears uniquely here. Nidvot pi ritzei na Adonai, free will offerings of my mouth, please accept. The idea that our words can be an offering. Mind you, Psalms is identified with the time of the temple and physical offerings. Here, an offering of the mouth is a nidivah, a free will, a gratitude offering as well. I will point, okay. And yet, I'm going to go over just a few minutes. I have an eye on the clock. Although there is this strong indication of the importance of following and learning the law, there is always the exception to the rule. And the rabbis will quote verse 126 as permission to annul law. Here's the context. Eit lasot ladonai, it is time to do for Adonai, hefiru Toratecha, they have violated your law. And so in the Talmud, Rava first will say this can be read in one of two ways. Psalm verse 126. It can be either this is time for God to act, or it can be read this is a time to act for God. And Rashi, in that place in the Talmud, Brachot 63a, will give as the example Elijah on Mount Carmel. At that time, post-Deuteronomy, offerings were only supposed to be brought to the temple. And yet, Elijah has these prophets of Baal, and Elijah, will taunt them and say, we'll both put out offerings and God will choose by bringing fire. And Elijah will say to the prophets of Baal, you go first. And then he will say, maybe your God can't hear you. Chant louder. And of course, there's no response to the prophets of Baal, and then Elijah's offering, fire comes from heaven. And Rashi will say, although it's forbidden to bring offerings usually to God, here, where they violated your law, it was time to act for God. You can, if you will, in an emergency, an exigency, you can put aside even God's teaching. There is a debate in another place in the Tosefta, Brachot, when Jews were forgetting Torah. Hillel said, pay it no heed, it is time for the Lord to act, meaning there's nothing we need to do in terms of abrogating Torah. And Rabbi Meir, again, first, second century, said, no, it's time for us to act. And here was an example of how they acted. In Brachot, in the Mishnah 9:5, there was, at the end of the bringing of offerings, people would say, Olam, forever. And for the rabbis, the early rabbis, it became important to acknowledge a belief in the afterlife. And so they added the words as part of the benediction, Olam va'ad olam, forever and until forever, the second part being an affirmation. One last example, and there are more. Two other little quick ones. In the Talmud, Yoma 69a, Shimon HaTzadik is going out to meet Alexander the Great, who's conquering Israel. And he's the high priest. He puts on his priestly garment, the formal wear, to meet Alexander, according to that tractate in the Talmud. But normally, you're not supposed to leave the temple dressed as the priest. But he leaves the temple and wants to make a very formal, respectful appearance. And so this verse, it is time to do for Adonai, is cited. And last and most dramatically, the opportunity, the rabbis say, if it's written, you can't take out pieces of it. Meaning, to take an example, you can't take a paragraph or a haftorah and write it down. You got to take the entire book of Isaiah. And the rabbis said, well, to chant the haftorah, we're going to do that. Eit lasot ladonai. All right, more to say. And let me move quickly to do so. Here's the evidence that it might be a priest. 148, my eyes precede the night watches. There were 3 watches throughout the night that the Kohanim and the Levites had. Here in 169, we have the image again of study and prayer as joyful song. I just added the word joyful because the word rinati is not just song, but joyful song. And now to pull it together, this closing line. The psalm ends with a final plea. 170, let come my plea before you as is your declaration, save me. Let my lips utter praise because you teach me your statutes. Let my tongue echo your declaration, for all your commandments are just. Let your help be for help to me, for your precepts I have chosen. I have longed for your deliverance, Adonai. V'toratcha sha'ashua, and your Torah is my delight. Enliven my soul, and it shall praise you, meaning we're in a partnership. You want, which is a reoccurring theme in Psalms, you want to give me life because I will use my life to praise you. Let your laws help me. Let your teachings guide me. And that last line, which we looked at the beginning, I have strayed like a lost sheep, acknowledging his own challenge throughout his life to stay on course. Seek your servant, for your commandments I have not forgotten. There is a similar line in Isaiah 53:6. Chulanu ketson ta'inu, all of us, like a flock that has erred or strayed. The same word here. And so, two closing comments. If you look at verse 10, with all my heart, I have sought you, verse 10. Now look at verse 94. For you am I, deliver me, for your precepts I have sought. The same word. But now the precepts become the substitute for God. Here's one more example of that switching of how God and looking for God becomes looking, the same verb used for God's teachings. Verse 38. Fulfill for your servant your declaration, which is for those who are in awe of you. Asher li'yiraticha. And now, verse 120, the same phrase, to be in awe, but shuddering from fright of you is my flesh, and your law I am in awe. Which is to say, to pull this now together, this long psalm prayer is an expression of seeking God and seeing God's teachings as the mediator, the path to experiencing God, and to knowing how to live a life of stability. It's a long psalm, ordered, A, B to Z, saying that your law is enabling a quality of order in life. It's hard to do it all, is also conveyed. It's so much. And yet, you have given me, God, teachings that allow me to grow close to you. Allow me to be close to you, to have a life of safety, of stability from those who do not follow your way, those with the power, with the calloused hearts. Let my eyes be opened to your teachings so that my heart will be present with and for you in praise. With that, some reactions. I'm delighted to see a nice turnout and in part some of my beloved brother-in-law's friends, which delights me. Again, I want to pull up some words by Dov LaSalle before Kaddish. But before we get to Kaddish, 5-10 minutes, if anybody have any thoughts about a verse or a question, Richard, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
Well, something stood out on your last presentation, Psalm 136. He says, streams of water have my eyes shed because they did not keep your instruction. And there's kind of a tension there. How do we understand that? And a couple of verses prior to that, it says, redeem me from man's oppression and let your face shine upon your servant. And I was, the first way I looked at it, and maybe you can clarify this. My first approach was that his oppressors were causing him to shed tears, the pain of that oppression, the experience of it. And then I got to thinking, you know what, this may be telling us the impact that Torah, that his law is having on him, and that he is actually having compassion on his oppressors and shedding tears on their behalf. So anyway, that was my thought. Maybe you can clarify what that should mean more closely.
So let me share that there's an ambiguity that you're addressing provides. So let me share with everybody three possible ways to understand why he's crying, or the nature. Streams of water descend from my eyes, for they who do not observe your Torah. Now, the they can either be the evildoers. It can be for eyes do not observe your Torah. Could be their eyes. Or the they could simply be water. Streams of water descend from our eyes for water. For those who do not observe your Torah, your teaching. So, yes, there's an ambiguity if he's crying for them or because of them. And if the plural refers to the abundance of tears or to the abundance of those others, or even a small subtlety maybe for himself. And so there is this possibility of reading it as a statement of compassion. That's possible. Other comments or questions?
I have a question on verse 126, which is very interesting. You know, your commentary is very interesting whenever you're talking about the idea that you ought to violate the law.
Yeah.
And if I read it, I mean, if you look at it literally, the first line says, it is time to do for God, they who have violated your law. And I guess to me, at least the plain meaning would seem to be that, you know, those who have violated your law, now it is time to do for God. In other words, it almost sounds like tshuva. You violated the law, but now you should act for God. That seems to me to be a little more of, I don't know, just like a plain reading of it, as opposed to some kind of dispensation to in the future violate the law.
Well, thank you, Mitchell, and welcome to the class.
And
it overlaps with Chuck's comment of the ambiguity, of Richard's comment, I should say, with the ambiguity, which is back to Mitchell's sensitivity to the language. It can be read as, it is time to do for Adonai because they have violated your law. So it can be either a plea to the other to say, shape up, time now to act for God, and instead, and I should say not instead, and also, Mitchell, as the rabbis will use this phrase, it is time to do for Adonai, for they have violated your law, is perhaps taking it in another way. Here, for instance, in the book of Maccabees regarding fighting on Shabbat, it was understood as forbidden to fight on Shabbat. It was the day of rest. And you'll see in the book of Maccabees in the beginning, they don't. And they get creamed. And then there are those who will use this verse to justify where you have the need to fight even though it's Shabbat. It is time to act for Adonai. They have violated your law because there is an enemy that threatens us. So again, the nature, Mitchell, of so much of Psalms and Torah is ambiguity that allows for more than one possible reading, and the pshat, the straightforward reading, is not the only way the rabbis will use the potential text when needed. All right, one last comment by Cantor Shula, and then I'm going to read something by my brother-in-law. Go ahead, Shula.
Once again, I'm always loving the language thing, and especially how certain words may or may not have evolved and morphed into meanings in today's Hebrew. I'm looking at verse 81, and it says, Kalta li tshuatcha nafshi, and translated here as failing, yet this particular combination of kalta and nafshi shows up in an extremely famous poem by Chaim Nachman Bialik, and there kalta means longing. And I believe it can be used here too. You know, my soul is longing, and that means a very, very strong longing, like saying in English, boy, I'm dying to see this, you know? longing for your, let's see, deliverance, my soul. So in today's Hebrew, that means longing. And I see actually now, just noticing that another form of that word appears in 96, lechol tichla, tichla ra'iti ketz. And here too, it can be even used as intense, soul-crushing longing. It amuses me. I love it.
So let me share with you, which I love you quoting Bialik, the great poet laureate of Israel, that this is the first time the word appears in the Bible. It's the fancy Latin terms is hapax legomenon. And in this psalm, there are two words that have not appeared elsewhere in the Bible. Tichla, this word, which translators, because it's the first time the word appears in the Bible, will have a variety of translations. I used failing, part to use variation. Here's one other word that appears nowhere else in the Bible. Verse 61, the word ivduni, which in context gets translated by most translators as surrounded me. And so again, I love how this psalm ripples forward, both to be used, like as Mitchell pointed out, not in its necessarily first contextual reading, but used legally and repeatedly, though only in exceptional cases. And in that light, we're honoring my brother-in-law this morning in this, the week of his Shiva. He, with the help of his son Ben, who is with us, did a series of recordings about a year ago when his voice was beginning to become compromised by ALS. And he, who was a lawyer for LA for 45 years with the city attorney's office, who had become responsible for low-income housing. He was the general counsel for 10,000 low-income housing units. He would be, because he was very involved and interested in investing in real estate, he would be instrumental in both the Staples Center project and creating the wholesale food downtown. And so in his own personal life, he was an investor buying real estate. And he did a series of lectures on how to invest. But when he finished that series, that when my wife and I watched those YouTubes, and you can look up the YouTubes, Dov Lesel, L-E-S-E-L, he then began to do a series on Torah. Because for him, im ein kemach ein Torah, if there is no flour, there is no Torah, to quote the Pirkei Avot, ve'im ein Torah ein kemach, and if there is no Torah, there is no flour. That both were essential. And Dov participated in the synagogue around the corner from his house, Temple Sinai in LA, in a Torah study group. And I remember talking to him about this in the last year or so. And he talked to me about being in a Shabbat study group, not unlike the one that Mimi Goldstein does for our community. Lay-led, he said, as somebody who had grown up as a yeshiva student, that for the first time he had been prompted to ask, how is Torah relevant for me? And so he writes, in an essay that he wrote for his Torah study group 9 months ago, our sages teach that the Torah has 70 interpretations. They also said, turn it over and over because everything is in it. Just like a scientist searches to better understand the world we live in, it is for us to try and understand teachings that we can learn for today. These teachings not only include how we should live in society, but how we should treat ourselves, others, the earth, with respect and compassion. At the Torah study, the following question was often asked: how is this relevant today? This, in part, is my attempt to answer that question. And then at the end of his 13 pages, seeking to answer, is the following 2 sentences. Again, written amidst ALS and decline. My newfound appreciation for the Torah and its sublime wisdom has increased my belief in God and makes it easier for me to accept the next stage. I hope these thoughts inspire you to continue studying, end quote, to turn the Torah over and over. Go ahead, Deidre.
Okay, so in verse 130, it says, the way that I translated this was, the opening of your words gives light, discernment it gives to the simple. And I thought about how when you're opening, like you can translate that as entrance, but like opening up his words gives light and it allows the simple to have discernment. It reminded me of Genesis when God said, let there be light. There was light. He said it was good. And he separated between light and darkness. I mean, there was a discerning. He was able to tell the difference. We were able to see the separation there. And when you said that the person writing this psalm may have been a Kohen, it reminded me of last week's parsha where we were reading about like the food laws, and God said that you're to teach people the difference in how to separate between what's holy and profane. So when you're opening up his words, it's giving you the insight to be able to tell the difference between things, to discern between things. I was like, oh, maybe he was a Kohen. This is awesome.
So I'll build on your insight, Deidre, and it's lovely. The word for understanding in Hebrew in that verse is mevin, which is the root is bain, bet yud nun, which means between. Yeah. And that discernment is the ability, as you were highlighting, to make distinction between good and bad, light and darkness. So it's a beautiful midrash on your part in terms of parsing the words. That is even stronger to add to it with the word chosen for understanding, which is to make distinctions. Mm-hmm. And that's the act of creation in what you just shared. You know, God doesn't in the creation create ex nihilo from nothing. The world seems to already exist. That's a larger philosophical issue. Yeah. Because in terms of God having created the matter, but what God is doing is lahavdil, making divisions or distinctions between, and that's the act of creation itself.
Yeah, I love that. Just in the context of food, separating holy from common, what's set apart and what's common. And separating the people, they're set apart. They're not just common like everything else. They're special and
that's right.
Reserved for a purpose. So there's foods that are reserved for a purpose. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It's just that they're not for this purpose, and that purpose is you.
That's
so
right. Or to add
all the mitzvot, he's separating.
Or to add to that, as another example, and you're still focused on last week's Torah reading with food, which is well done, well said, and that is that labor is created before the Sabbath, or the command, peru or vu, fill up the world, the chivshuha, and control it, and only then is the Sabbath, the seventh day, which is to say, labor is an important creation, and it's not good and bad. It's necessary to have both. Yeah,
I love that. Just there's so many. You could go forever just mining the connections out of this. You know.
Do you have one last one, Deidre, and then I'll pull it together?
Oh my God, do I have another one?
No, just give one last one to honor your creativity.
Oh goodness. Just pulling together the sheep analogy that you had connected to Isaiah 53. There's also the connection to Isaiah 40, where speaking of God, the prophet says, like a shepherd, he will tend his flock, and in his arm, he will gather the lambs and carry them in his bosom, like carry them to his chest. And it tying all of that together of us being sheep and him being a caring shepherd who doesn't just push you along in a path, but he picked you up and carried you. Like you would carry a baby,
Yeah.
And it also reminded me something, a parable that Jesus told his followers, that if you have a flock and a sheep wanders off, you're going to leave the flock to go get the one that wandered away. And I thought about the prophet, about Isaiah, how you would take up that lamb and carry it like a good shepherd would. And
So let me build on that with a quick teaching, and then I have to go. And that is the image of Isaiah 40 also gets echoed, of course, in Psalm 23. Adonai ro'i lo echzar, God is my shepherd, I shall not want. The image of God caring and leading us to flowing streams and pastures. Rabbi Nachman, he was the great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov was the founder of Hasidism 1700 to 1760. His great-grandson, Rabbi Nachman, lived in the mid-19th century. And he focuses on the last two words, which is lo shechachti, I have not forgotten. And here's what he writes, that when a sheep strays, after a while, the sheep forgets its need to be cared for, develops a quality of independence. It becomes a wild sheep.
Yeah.
And after a sheep has strayed, likewise, a shepherd can give up looking and forget that I need to find that sheep. This is now my flock. And so the last words of this long psalm are, I have not forgotten. The psalmist says, even though I'm a lost sheep, I have not gone rogue. I have not become independent. I still depend on you, God, to pull me in, to use your image of Isaiah 40, to be my shepherd.
If you really want like super prophetic level, you could say that that's also like a stealth reference to exiles.
Yes.
Remembering Torah in exile and returning.
And all the Psalms, exactly, are read by the rabbis always on the two levels of the King David in a traditional mode and those who are in exile, saying, God, even though I feel like I have strayed because you're not there, I have not forgotten that you are there. Yeah.
Israel, whom he scattered, he will gather. Thanks, Hosea.
Nice. Great to be with each of you. Thank you, Deidre, for all your input on Psalm 119.
Have you for doing these studies. Be blessed.
Thank you. Psalm 120, we're starting to ascend. All right. Be well. Have a good day.